Yo, how's everyone? Time for a double whammy. Fuck it. Knuckles crack. You're not gonna hear any digital effects on this. It's time to take out racism and separation. Because it all falls down to one basic premise. But there's a set of understandings that weren't necessarily acknowledged by civilization and has slowly started to be understood as we started evolving or as we progressed through our evolution. Yet it is not a general mass thing or a general mass understanding, mostly because, the general influence is spinning in a different direction, still repeating ideas and thought processes of what was. So those processes are continuously repeating, thus, through television, social media, and all of that. Thus, we haven't necessarily entirely, as a society and as a civilization, understood these concepts, which would have just stopped conflict. And it's not that much of a complex bag, because even if I'm writing on the video down below saying taking out racism and separation, it all falls down to initial basic premise that I just kept repeating over and over and over, and now I can kind of hone it in on this. It's basically all the same thing, but hey, let's give it a go, right? So first and foremost, there's one key thing that we weren't necessarily taught. We were brought up with that situation or that topic, but it was quite quickly skimmed over. And it's the aspect of being a soul. See, there was always this talk about mind, body, spirit, having a soul and a body and a mind, just skimmed over, saying, okay, now go do your homework and go do your work and all that. Yet, there's very interesting keys when it comes to that. Especially that when best example, you look at a baby, okay? A baby doesn't have any perception. A baby doesn't have any idea of what is. A baby doesn't necessarily associate words to shapes and colors. Being a baby is like having a blank hard drive to a certain degree. Yes, there are certain things carried on from the parents, but vision-wise, understanding-wise, everything, description-wise, it's a blank slate. It's a blank hard drive. You just got Windows, whatever, Windows 2020, depending on the year that you're born, okay? But it is a blank slate. The brain begins to capture information along the time. Yet remember that state as a baby, the blank slate aspect of things, connected to all practically, because that's the soul. There's no separation until you learn your name. And then various other things, you start separating things. And that's not to say it's not a bad thing. Key thing to remember, good, bad, right, wrong, you learn it as you're dropped into that society, and you pick up whatever is around you from that initial dice roll, which is, all right, you're going to be, let's say my example, you're going to be Canada, Montreal, two Haitian parents coming back from a turmoil from their country, and there's your dice roll. And then from that point on, your physical living, whatever you ingest in the mind, is from that dice roll and that area. So you do not have conscious selection of that initial dice roll. There's a phrase going on saying, you don't choose your parents. Well, you don't. You don't choose your environment. You're just rolling with that initial dice roll from that initial state. Always remember, it's kind of like two different states. You're, as a baby, fully open, interconnected. You don't necessarily put limitations and separations. You don't know any of it. Yet then you get the dice roll, which begins your mind, your hard drive getting filled up with the local environment, their point of view, the how do you say, the customs, the traditions, the ways of thinking and the ways of being, all that influencing your young mind because you've just started out. It's a blank hard drive. It needs to get filled up so that at one point, possibly around the age of 10, some say, because 0 to 9, you just keep ingesting that information. Around the age of 10, your hard drive has enough information to cross-reference whatever other informations are coming in. So you're able to actively select, unless you've been taught earlier on. Key thing to remember, unless you were taught to cross-reference and look at various different points of view. Because you're still running on that initial dice roll. You don't necessarily have an active take on what you're ingesting. And the thing is, since it's on a blank hard drive, okay, most of the things that you will learn will be anchored in emotionally, possibly through repetition as well, but will not necessarily have the full logic depending on the case. Certain things is just going to be, oh, okay, well, I learned this from my parents, thus I'm not necessarily changing what I've learned. You know, initially, especially as a kid, you kind of idolize them to a certain degree. They brought you into this world and they'll tell you all this kind of stuff. But you never chose any of those perspectives and points of views. Well, you did and you didn't. Welcome to Non-Duality 2020. It's gonna kick us in the nuts. 2020, 2021 is the time to fucking learn about non-duality, because you did and you didn't. You unconsciously did, and you consciously did not do it. Or you didn't do it consciously, but you unconsciously did. So, conscious choice is you staying at a position and time and going, okay, do I actively want to take this choice? Do I actively want to take this point of view, knowing what it's going to do 10 steps ahead? Knowing what's going to come back to me when acting upon that point of view. Very key and important detail. Unless you are taught about that, you don't necessarily go through that process early on. So there's a lot of stuff that you take into your hard drive, like downloading like crazy, that you didn't necessarily filter. And you didn't necessarily take a step back to understand, do I really want to pick that up? So when you kind of get that premise that your hard drive, your mind, gets filled up after your initial dice roll, but that's not your state, go back and look at what's up with the soul. Or, you know, that thing we kind of skimmed over. It was like, oh, you got a soul. Just skim over it. Okay? Because now we're heading in a very important point, okay? When it comes to the soul, you can have a very easy mode way of detecting what it tells you. Because the two primary emotions, joy and hate, are the ones getting poked at every day with different variations, okay? And there's another way to kind of say it. There's joy, but there's also separation. Separation from who? Well, from you and the entirety of the universe. From you, or if you want to say God, you know? That's your second emotion. Whenever you feel angry at someone, whether it be yourself or someone else, it is still a variation of that same emotion of separation, of that same warning signs, okay? Because your perception of what is happening in the moment is not in accordance with you and the universe. In a very simple way, you're primarily the soul, but because of that initial dice roll, and of course evolution, civilization, not necessarily understanding the mind-body-spirit complex, well, you've kind of stuck yourself into the mind. That's why you look around, and a lot of people are going into depression, anxiety, fearful, okay? Most of this is just being stuck in the mind, forgetting that you're the soul. Because you get wrapped around in what the hard drive is saying, forgetting that you're the person behind the computer, okay? Now, I can bet a lot of people kind of going, okay, where does racist and separation kind of come in? Wait! Because this is the time you sit and process this, because it's been skimmed over. It's been like, oh, yeah. And then a couple of years later, depression, anxiety, fearfulness, hate, repetition loop. You know, I get it. Oftentimes, some of these things, we've been bombarded with this aspect of fast, go. But this is the shit you want to take time and sit and process within yourself. Feel free to pause that video, man. Click on that button and pause that video from time to time just to look within yourself and make those experiments. Because we've skimmed over this, and now we're seeing what happens when you kind of let that hard drive stack its shit, in a sense, unchecked. Completely unchecked. It's not accusatory. It's just kind of bring the harsh words to make fun of it, too. Because it happens. You don't know what you don't know at any point of time. Yeah, this is the time where you kind of want to sit down and think about this. Think about it this way. Think of a negative belief about yourself and feel what kind of comes up. Doesn't really feel well, right? Feels like shit. It does. You know, what about thinking about doing your dream and then a negative belief comes up? Okay. Now, what if I say Donald Trump? Okay. That was a trap card for whoever is still into the whole political game. But if you reacted based on what how you perceive this person, or what you were led to perceive about this person, because we can dive a lot about how perception is influenced, and that's where we're going to go in. You're going to react. Okay, better example, or a better way, because certain people might not necessarily feel squat. Who knows? Think about, okay, you could say 9/11. Maybe it's too far back. Think about a lost family member, okay? A family member that kind of passed away. You're feeling it, okay? Think about that person at work that just pisses you off, or that person in town, or even that person on the internet that pisses you off. Feeling it, right? It's a fucking variation of the same feeling. Whine about yourself or whine about someone else, it is still a variation of that same feeling. Hate yourself or hate someone else, it's still a variation of that same feeling. Now let's jump on the opposite. What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite scene about your favorite movie? What's your favorite game? What's your favorite segment about your favorite game? What's so fun about your favorite sport or activity? What's so fun about your favorite food, your favorite meal? What was the most fun moment you had during graduation? What was the most fun moment you had during vacation? See? What's a fun belief about yourself? Now, this is a bit tricky one for those who are running the depression cycle, and it's understood because there's going to be a negative belief that might pop up. But if it doesn't, what do you feel? Okay? Two main emotions, different variations. Okay? Two main reactions, different variations. Okay? Why do you get that feeling of separation? Because let's just place it as separation at this point, okay? When you're thinking hatefully about someone else or yourself. It's because when it comes to the aspect of the soul, we're all connected. It's all the same soul. All part of the same oversoul, some would say. It's all part of the same. See, when you're running as the mind and body for an amount of years, you basically only look at skin, clothing, all of that. And that's your determination for you being separate from someone else. But multiple texts and philosophies have told you the opposite. And, well, unfortunately, organizations that took over these texts and these philosophies, or what the prophets, the various prophets and messengers have said, Well, they took over that message and then placed rule sets and then placed exceptions for the all-loving aspect of things. But welcome to 2020. We've kind of, as a group, as a collective, various people on this earth, just kind of went, wait a second, what? And, you know, started to see the false dichotomy of saying, oh, well, the text says accept all and everyone, but accept these people, or accept that, or accept this. And then a lot of people started figuring out as well that, you know, if the Creator creates you in their image, then they can't punish you for creating you in their image, because that would make sense. Think of it this way: you creating something exactly as you would, exactly as you. You can't fault your creation for acting and having all the choices that you have. It does not make logical sense, nor does it make heartfelt sense. So, whenever you were threatened to go to hell because of not following someone else's idea and principle, you got that feeling because the Oversoul told you, hey, wait a fucking minute, that doesn't make sense. That's completely against nature. Don't you dare feel bad. That's not a perception that's in connection with you in the universe. Whenever you would hate someone else because someone told you to do so, same reaction. Wait a minute. That's not in accordance to you in the universe. That's not how the Creator thinks. That's not in your perception is not in accordance with the universe. And universe or God, whatever terms you want to say, because that's another mind thing. When you got on this earth and you were shoved into a religion, you were just assigned a name. And mental process wise, especially subconsciously, which we'll get to a tad bit later on, well, you'll get a feeling of separation, not necessarily understanding this logic, because this logic was never told to you from these people that did not know what they did not know. So, unfortunately, you're kind of running a pattern of feeling that separation is someone else's fault, feeling that the anger, the aggression at times is someone else's fault. But no, that feeling is literally telling you your perception is not in accordance to yourself and the universe, God, Oversoul, whatever you want to call it. Literally. You'll just feel it because you feel the same feeling when you feel shit about yourself. It's another variation of that same feeling. Okay? So, collectively, because of the unfortunate aspect of our evolution and a lot of people kind of following trends, this aspect of sticking to groups, not wanting to stay out of groups, so I'll follow whatever you say. And also as a kid, you don't necessarily want to be disowned by your parents because you still feel a high aspect of importance to them. But funny enough, when you think about it, you get a feeling right then and there going, well, that perception's not in accordance to you in the universe. So you kind of go, what the fuck? But you're taught that this feeling is, you'd better fear. You'd better damn fear for the situation. So it keeps you in this really insane loop when you think about it. Thinking about it in retrospective. Because you don't know what you don't know, and the same goes for everyone else that taught you that. Okay? You don't know what you don't know. And the same kind of goes for everyone else that's been working under these perimeters, including you. So it's like you ultimately end to the point of just letting go. Because you understand this aspect that you were not taught how soul interacted with your mind and body, which led you to even more, again, the continuation of the momentum of that initial dice roll, which you did not choose. And the same goes for your parents and environment until choice is understood. But you kind of need to understand this feeling or have your own experiments. So that's why I tell you, pause, reflect, think, and take that time. Because when you don't, it'll just drive you mad. I've recently encountered some interesting examples of people that have even studied some of this stuff, yet still are entangled in an aspect of hating their neighbors just for noise. or hating someone else not for wearing a mask or something. And it's like, but you studied this, and it's like, it's not that they're some people, again, with the rushed language that we have, they're like, oh, some people are just dumb. No, they're not dumb. Subconscious is a bitch because you don't necessarily know the entirety of what goes on through that. Again, 0 to 9, you ingest that shit or whatever perimeters you from your environment, you ingest it like candy. But there's no actual, or let's say, clear and understood logic, because it's taken from the environment and you don't necessarily have anything to cross-reference that. You don't necessarily even have, depending on where you're born, you don't necessarily have the understanding and the knowledge to take time to reflect upon yourself. You know, oftentimes you're said, okay, well, go pray to God and he'll take that away from you. That's not reflecting. And that's not even what's considered true prayer. Admittingly, true prayer happens all the fucking time. That's going a bit too much into esoteric, I understand. But let's be clear. Prayer happens all the time. Whatever you think and say is prayer. Which could give you a bit of a hint about some of the things that you've been receiving in your lifetime. But we'll get into the whole esoteric thing in another video. It's just understanding the base perimeter that we were kind of shoved into, which literally caused an aspect of natural separation from, you know, not knowing what we don't know and being taught from people who didn't know what they didn't know. There were other people that knew about this, but society as a whole was still running the old momentum. Then television and radio kept that old momentum inadvertently because it kept repeating habits of the past. Past being could even be considered a second or 2 minutes ago. But we're talking about general mannerism of society, ways of seeing people, ways of talking and expressing about people, because it's made for entertainment, and at the same time it picks off what was popular at the time. Problem is, when you keep repeating those mannerisms inadvertently and you keep getting exposed to those mannerisms, they stay in your hard drive. And you don't necessarily logically think about this, because guess what? Upon repetition, sticks to your subconscious. So your conscious mind doesn't necessarily bat an eye about it. That's why, again, we are 2020. We're hearing a lot about depression, anxiety, and all of that. There's a lot of lack of mindfulness, which wasn't necessarily taught. So it is a lack, and it's not. You know, when it's not taught, then you can't necessarily consider it a willing lack. You know what I mean? So don't know what you don't know, and that's that. Yet when that stuff just keeps piling up without necessarily having any logical connection or rightful logical connection, and you don't necessarily know what your soul tells you, you just keep feeling this, and it's like, oh, it becomes normal. And that's where, well, that's where you can get into some serious problems. Because lock your heart for long enough, ignore that feeling for long enough, or project that feeling onto another, saying it's the other person's fault for long enough, and you're just running yourself into the ground. Plus, of course, with enough anxiety and depression, you literally break down the cells in your body. Fucking science proves it now. It's been proven a couple of years ago, but science is telling you this. Even the texts and scriptures were talking about this. So you can see how not listening to your heart, which is connected to the soul, not listening to those messages, will fuck with you. But again, all this is inadvertent. Just take the time to reflect upon this and kind of get, okay, how am I not in a, how is this perception? Again, perception, not you. You're the soul. So you're kind of sending the messages too. It gets really a bit of a metagame as well, because, you know, there's a soul you and there's mind and body. But you can always do this third person thing where you can look at the whole mind and body complex from a third person, you're able to analyze and hear your thoughts. So you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts being from your mind, this collection of terms, terminology, even your language is from the mind. So it ain't from the soul. Yet you being able to observe it from the soul's point of view should tell you where the controller is. Okay? Now we've tackled on a part of separation. Now we're going to link this up to racism. Very simple. Okay, this goes, it's not only for the black community, white community, any community. It practically is all community, but let's just have black community on the podium for a bit when it comes to that. Oftentimes again, that initial dice roll brings us with parents that kind of heavy-handed or very mouthy, verbal about their displeasure. Now, again, fully understanding that a person would not consciously choose something that would shoot them in the foot later on, when understood. But they didn't understand, and they weren't necessarily taught that way, because oftentimes they may come from a religious background. They may be from environments that would continuously stick in that kind of method of thinking. And again, it's not a mass generalization. Of course, there are people that, folks in the community that were not part of that. You guys, to God. But it's kind of like saying, of course, there were people that were not in that. But when, as a mass, okay, this aspect of having parents that are verbal, that are heavy-handed, that won't necessarily talk to you to explain their point of view, yet instead will shout, okay? When you get that as an initial dice roll, okay, you're not necessarily taught to go within. You're not necessarily taught about the separation aspect, because the initial person that is supposed to kind of teach you about that is kind of running the process, again, mine being a hard drive, is running the process of, this is your fault for me being mad. They are not running, my perception is not of you. My perception of you is not according to God and the universe and I as a soul. They don't necessarily know about the oversoul. So early on, you take on their programming. Again, you didn't choose. And they didn't fucking choose. They've just been running this program as if it was normal. Like a person running depression or constantly bitching and whining about their neighbors for an amount of year. Or that person that'll constantly get into gossip trouble and you keep hearing about them. It's the same thing. Subconsciously running that program and transferring it indirectly without necessarily knowing. Yet here's the thing. From that point, and especially if, let's say, the punishment for telling the truth is getting shouted at, is getting hit, because as a kid, you're going to be honest. And you respect them because they brought you to this world. But here's the thing. If as a punishment, you're getting this harsh and heavy punishment repeated over and over again for telling the truth, your subconscious keeps that feeling of pain and wants to evade that at all costs. Survival mind is like, well, fuck that. I want to stay away from pain. Naturally, you want to stay away from pain. Naturally. So early on, that survival mind will just go, okay, well, fuck that. I won't necessarily tell the truth. This is the reward that I'm getting. And right then and there, indirectly, you shoot your foot because you're not necessarily getting into the pattern of sticking to your truth without giving a credence to someone else's perception. Now, better said, you do not let your own perception affected by someone else's perception, because ultimately you understand that this comes from the momentum of their dice roll and which is like the collected experiences and the granular experience that they've had over their lifetime. How is that supposed... It's kind of like saying, how is it you're supposed to read their granular experience? How are you supposed to read their hard drive? Not to get them angry. It's impossible. It's fucking impossible. But they did not know. Why? Because they were taught that way. Indirectly, look at the chain of event that happens. Okay, so I'm not gonna start listening to my own truth because fear, survival. You're stuck, as an idea, as a kid, you're stuck in this household. You want to survive. Indirectly, they may have brought whatever they faced in the streets or various other places in the household, because subconsciously this just keeps running emotionally. But the logic is never sat down to consider what's going on. Plus, there's no understanding of what the soul says. So it's always another person's fault. Always. It's never understood as that perception being not in accordance to yourself and the universe / God. Because if you flip that scenario, okay, let's say you've grown up, but you have massive amount of resentment for these people, for what they've done, okay, for your parents. Well, again, you're going to get that feeling, and the logical understanding to dismantle this, just if you want a quick healing, quick clearing, okay, you basically need to understand that very same concept. They didn't choose. Subconsciously, that shit sticks on. And until you get the knowledge, because we are really fucking lucky this 2020, we've been able to combine multiple philosophies and understandings to comprehend this from multiple lenses and stop fighting with each other over, oh my God is better, oh my God is better. No, fuck that. We're here to help everyone, and people just started getting keyed in on that. So we're lucky. We're at this amazing sweet spot where humanity could straight up just skyrocket in this aspect of unity. If you just disconnect from social media, because the pattern keeps getting repeated. But upon that understanding being understood by more and more people, which is inevitable, well, then you're going to see some major change. Yet, understanding that, you can't blame them. You can't blame your parents. You can't blame their parents for teaching them that. And you can't blame, if you want to go all the way to the chain, you cannot blame the slave owners that initially had that habit instilled. Because that's where it all comes from. Yet, you understand that the blame game isn't going to bring you anywhere. And soul just tells you, nope, not in accordance to that. And you're like, really? Really? Because of those fucking slave owners of years ago? So, you know why? Because they repressed the aspect of soul because of their religion and also not knowing. Can you see the trickling down of habits and behaviors as well as the ripple effect in time that it creates? As well as the more knowledge and understanding that is created because of people just going, well, wait a second, there's got to be something else to this. This is really key and crucial to understand, because you can also perceive how people fighting in the streets right now, they're perpetuating the same problem. They're perpetuating the same problem of separation by not listening to this and not knowing. But then pointing their anger, that feeling, towards someone else instead of their own perception. And some people are just going to argue and fight about it. And they're like, yeah, but you're good. And it's like, the universe is telling you, God is telling you. You're getting mad at me or someone else for trying to help you, but God is telling you. You can't. Oh, you want to lock that out? Because when you get to this point of understanding, no one chooses their initial dice roll. So you may be born in a family like the Westboro Baptist Church and have to leave 18 years after, when you understand, when you kind of get the difference between your conscious and subconscious. You know, your conscious tells you, wait a minute, the text says that God accepts everyone. Everyone. You know, Jesus told me to accept everyone. Buddha, like told me to remove identity. So what does that mean? You accept everyone. You don't have any identity. You don't have an identity that separates you. So accept everyone. So why are my parents picketing? You know? Like, it takes the time it takes. And sometimes it may never happen for certain people because they've locked their heart really early on. When you get some really tragic childhoods, there's a percentage of chance that you will not land on this kind of information and make the inner work. There's also a percentage of chance that the inner work might be really tricky to do alone, so you won't fucking do it. There's also another percentage of chance that you might not even see the value of it, yet still run off into depression afterward, going, fuck, you know? So there's all sorts of percentage of chance. You can't label and blame a person for where they're at, because you're at where you're at. You don't know what you don't know. And this little habit, this societal habit, indirectly propagated by television and scripts, but it's not their fault. It's entertainment. Well, it's this habit of expecting from another, assuming from another, assuming other people's intention. It's grown rampant with social media. Rampant as fuck. Because when we're reading texts, we kind of want to try and assume what the person's intention is, but text has no real flavor. I mean, you can try to sugarcoat it with as many, let's say, descriptions as you can, but it is never going to be as the spoken word, with different intonation variations and changes of understanding. Because as you've noticed, there's various times where I go, better said. It's because in the moment there's a better way of phrasing this understanding and explanation, or a way that could try to reach different people. But with text you don't get that. So this habit of assumption of intention based on a repetition of what was saw, kept inside the hard drive as an identity, literally kind of just fucks with people online, you know? So when you kind of get that, again, the initial dice roll, you don't put the blame on anyone. You don't, and you combine that with your soul's reaction, and you understand the kind of like the futility of blame and fighting. Okay? And there's even more esoteric stuff when it comes to what you send out. When you want to solve a cause, what you send out is very key. Because if you're going to go around with an aggressive energy or an aggressive mindset, you will reap the same. You can even take the less esoteric route. If you're going to go up to a person and call them a fucker because of their race or their skin color, well, you've got multiple possibilities of things that could come back your way, including another person from that very same race with a shorter temper smacking you in the face. Or, more sneakfully, that habit and that perception continuously repeating inside your mind, blocking your opportunities for joy. Because you never know who you're going to encounter in the future that may help you discover and understand more things joyful in life. Literally. This ain't just movie talk. This ain't just hairy-fairy stuff. When you start looking at the percentage of chances and events that can happen in your life, and how you literally dismiss or tone down various percentages just by what you're thinking, what your, again, initial dice roll leads you to think, and how it leads you to think. You want to actively choose yourself, shoot yourself in the butt, right? Choose to shoot? Fuck no. So that's why it's like you just kind of let go. But you also do it from a point of that universal understanding. If you couldn't choose your dice roll on this physical plane, no one else could. And if no one else could, you're all running that same initial start of not necessarily choosing what your environment puts in you. 0 to 9, man, you eat this shit like candy. So, yes, there's going to be some people born in this aspect of separation, separative mindset, separated from themselves and separated from others. Inadvertently, when it came to the black community, the main mistake, or you could call it a mistake, but at the end of the day, it doesn't turn out to be a mistake because things eventually work out later on. You don't stick into that one time and space type of thinking, so you don't call it a mistake after all. But for that moment, that one mistake was just even including the term and keeping it to the state that it was in the prior level of consciousness, meaning in prior years when those habits of thinking and feeling were a set way. Meaning, if I tell you about a story that happened a couple of years ago, I'm having you feel and think from that point based on my perception. But inadvertently, I've just implemented this virus in your hard drive. Because now you will get that lens of perception and you may see other events with that lens of perception. So if it wasn't for the fact that I gave you that lens inadvertently because I wanted to talk about my experience, I would have never given your hard drive, your young mind, a lens that could actively shoot you in the foot and bring up thoughts of anxiety over others, thoughts of separation, because your heart tells you. But if I don't tell you what your heart and soul connection is, then you're going to be running this pattern. And it's an unfortunate mistake on top of, again, that very heavy-handed parenting, that very mouthy parenting, which was never chosen. So when, again, get a clear understanding of all that, combine it all, take a time, pause and think. And especially when it comes to subconscious, if you want a good tip or a good trick to spot some of these subconscious thoughts, whenever you feel a feeling on reaction, but you can't necessarily locate what it is or what it means, pause and open that up, accelerate it, boost it, controlling it though. So you want to amplify that feeling just to go, okay, amplify it willingly on your own. You control it as you amplify it. So you're always in control. But acknowledge that control, amplify it up until you get to the point where it was initially placed. And what was the situation that initially placed it, so that you can get the really, flawed logic. But it was a logic at the time, but it was flawed. That's how often traumas are created. Flawed logic. You don't necessarily understand the logic that was then. It just stayed as a feeling. But now you're able to kind of go back through the memory using the feeling that you amplified, see the flawed logic, and change it. And no longer blame your parents nor people from the past, because you're getting a much more concrete understanding of this cycle. So you understand how futile it is to blame, and how the universe and God, whatever name you want to give, your hard drive, your rules, right? Whatever name you want to give is what kind of message it's getting you. This is why meditation, mindfulness, taking time to think about that, to revise your day and understand, why was I reacting there? Oh, I've been running a pattern of, let's say, accusation, depression. or expecting certain things from certain people or from certain ethnicities. Or maybe I'm still running the stereotype perimeter. And you can't be blamed for that. Hell, if we collectively as a society understood the power of repetition, the subconscious mind, and how repetition from television and social media would keep these habits inadvertently, you know, we would have just stopped. There would have been no binge watching. You know, it would be stabilized, gradually done. Same goes with our social media habits. But we didn't know what we didn't know. So what, are we gonna just sit there and pout and blame and be like, it's the media's fault, television's fault, it's my parents' fault, racism's fault? Or are we gonna understand the inevitable loop or the inevitable passing on or cyclical aspect of our evolution and just say, okay, it happened and it was inevitable at that point, with that time and that understanding of knowledge, and also the stronghold that religion had, and also how they were formed. Misinformation. Again, the apostles or disciples of most of the Grand Masters did not necessarily understand this, what they were saying, as a philosophy instead of an institution and a rule book. You know, because as soon as you get that heart-mind connection and connection to the soul, oh wow, yeah, okay, yeah, no need to have a rule book. You'll just feel what you feel in the moment, due to presence and practicing mindfulness and repetition of that, because repetition brings you to mastery. As soon as you do it, you don't necessarily need to go hardcore. You become better at it. Fuck it, we're like Saiyans in a sense. We just keep improving every time we repeat something. That includes negative habits or perceptions, which is unfortunately the habit that churches had, which is why they were fighting each other without necessarily understanding the base meaning of their philosophies. But hey, 2020, we even have science chipping in. Quantum physics, neuroscience. So, yeah, we understand the inevitability of it. We can just look at it, not spitefully, but just wisely. Understood that, okay, happened. Here are the mistakes. Here are to rectify them. And let's head into this new direction without forcing. Because there's no point in forcing. Everyone's at the point that they're at with the initial dice roll that they had. They'll seek what can help them in the way that can help them. And eventually, with more people understanding this, as I said, you can only spend so long being the only negative person in a room of, let's say, 4 people, that you eventually kind of start asking your question, well, wait, there's got to be something else out there. Well, wait, something else is going on, you know? And yeah, we unfortunately, you know, had this repetition of this idea of racism over and over and over. Special attention to me saying the word, the idea. Because, again, as soon as it's dropped in the mind, it creates a perception, a lens. But understanding that we're all soul and we're not mind and body, you can disassociate from that. And also balance it. Okay? Good exercise, always saying it. Disassociate. Go completely out of it. Say, what if I was not my mind, my body? And what if I was not my ethnicity, my stuff, my talent, my voice, my passion, all of that? What if I was not that? You go back to baby state. Enjoying, discovering, playing, and having fun with everything. Flow state is straight up that. Combination of mind and heart. Opening the kingdom, the doors to the kingdom. That was the metaphor. Doors of the kingdoms were open to the heart of children. That was the metaphor. Children do not judge until they are taught to judge, given the lens, inadvertently. So, that's the state that we're kind of in. We're in this amazing sweet spot where if more and more people understand that, then there's no separation afterward. It's like, oh, right, it's my perception of you, my bad. Oh, right, you didn't necessarily choose this habit because I can't see what you're attracting from that. I can basically know from my own experience when you start looking at your own karma and what you send out, especially gossip goers. If you notice your gossip goers continuously coming back with gossip and problems, that's the cycle. Esoteric, but there's also a psychological aspect to it. It's always a combination. All is part of the all, So you're like, oh, okay, well, let's bring this game to another level. You're no longer hands off the controller. You're actually taking the controller and understanding that the big play of separation that's been going on from years and years, and you got to watch out for movies about that. You really got to watch out. A little habit that we've collectively got, humanity, unfortunately, through the invention of television and not necessarily knowing, is feeling representations of events that happen at a certain time when not even being in context. But hey, now listening to this video, you understand the importance of context, which is your initial dice roll. So if I'm telling you a situation without unnecessary context, or I'm even having you feel something that you should never really feel in your life and time, and your mind inadvertently feels for the moments and momentum happening on screen, you subconsciously ingested those feelings and those momentums and those ideas, but you weren't even born in that time period, so you should never necessarily have that. But indirectly, it's perpetuated. Gotta watch out. There's various things. Like, on large, we've largely ignored the subconscious mind and how deep it is and how deep programming is. We always thought, oh, the Manchurian Candidate or other movies like that, that's brainwashing. That is the real thing. But no, your subconscious mind will learn through repetition. Very subtle little repetition. So if you keep getting those movies or having amazing terms like colonizer and all that, you're basically perpetuating that loop. Oh, yeah, right. There's also something that I did bring up in earlier videos, but let's hammer that a bit across. If you choose not to listen, if you choose not to even listen to your heart and soul connection, let's have a percentage of a scenario that could happen. Okay, so you're going off into a protest. Smash someone else's car. Had nothing to do, but you're like, hey, colonizer, you're the 1%. Fuck you. And, I'm mixing both because there were protests against the 1% and all that. Again, heart connection, watch out, it's telling you. Well, at the end of the day, you don't even know the person whose car you just smashed. That person will associate this loss, in a sense, they'll see it as a loss because a lot of people love their car, link it back to the protest that happened recently, may not have been part of the context, may not even know your fucking person or cause, but immediately, because of lack of mindfulness, again, majority of population still kind of runs, I won't say majority, I say there's still a big part, but not the majority, it's a big shift. Still running that old pattern of immediate association to the feeling of separation on someone else. So they'll just go, okay, you protesters, your cause, fuck you. And right then and there, that person that was not your enemy is now your enemy. You've just caused your own enemy. That's why this whole blanket labeling of one nation, one society, one ethnicity doesn't fucking matter who it is. Okay? It really doesn't fucking matter who it is. At the end of the day, your heart, mind, soul connection, it'll tell you. It doesn't fucking matter because you're perpetuating your own enemy. And yes, there's been times where some of these battles were instigated by people with interest. This is why, to a certain degree, you gotta watch out for media, social media. We're not gonna go into conspiracy theories because there's multiple documentaries of that. Go check out Zeitgeist, Part 1. But also at the same time, look at these documentaries from a stand apart. You don't necessarily want to get back into an aspect of hating and label. Because guess what? Even the people creating those events are stuck in their initial dice roll. Even those people. You would say the 1% or 0.5%, it doesn't matter. They're stuck in their own dice roll. Imagine that. You're born in a family that just shoves you into an aspect of thinking, this is your name, this is your honor, this is your family. How dare you? You must live up to that, or I will be disappointed in you. Whoa! What kind of fucked up hard feeling does that get you, right? Complete disconnection. Oh, it's just like saying that God will hate you if you do something that he does not deem worthy, because he created you with all of his habits and capabilities. So he's going to hate you for not doing as he says while being all that he is. Makes no sense, right? Just like, oh, if you don't follow this person's perception, you're a shit. You're not part of the family. But they were not taught about the whole heart-mind connection. And over years, again, you can get that shit locked off. Look at when it comes to being in the army, or instances where you actually have to harm another or kill another, that heart connection is trained to be locked off, because you can't do your job if you do so. So you really want us all to be locked off like that? And it's, again, all is part of the all. So there was and is a purpose for that. And of course it's diminishing as we're all coming to understand, oh fuck, we're all the same souls. You know, but you can see the consequences of that when you see veterans coming back. There's a lot of subconscious shit that's never dealt with. And the institutions being in one way of thinking, one mindset, alright, have some pills, you'll be fine. Of course it doesn't work. We've seen what happens with the recent generation. You can't just pill people to death. You can't just do that. Mindfulness needs to be acquired. Understanding that heart-mind connection too. So, this goes out to everyone. You can literally just take down that aspect of separation and racism. It's all about you yourself understanding it, understanding that connection, and being in that understanding, not forcing it onto another. But while you're being in that understanding, you can always kind of help, poke here and there, yet accept that the people that don't necessarily resonate to it aren't up to that point. And of course, initial dice roll. So you understand how those subconscious thoughts might keep people locked in. Best example is when you try to get certain people to understand that universal connectedness and how it was initially taught by the prophets, they'll want to fight you. They'll want to bring up any verses or proverb from Matthew 12 something, because that's how they were programmed. They don't think about it through heart and mind. They think about it only with the hard drive. And it's not their fault. So understand that we're at this sweet spot where as a civilization, we can fucking do this. We got this. It's practically a slam dunk. It's just taking the time to be a bit more mindful. And again, that is on your own personal base. And, you know, once you kind of understand, you don't kind of get, you know, sucked into social media or binge watching. You kind of just take that time to the side. Rebalance yourself. It's your hard drive, so you take care of it, right? Get some of those viruses out of it. And enjoy this beautiful fucking world, because it's all a practice. All an internal practice. So, if you've got any other questions, and you want to have a bit more explanations on various other things, hell, even diving into esoteric, because 2020, get good. You've already been using it all your life. You just need to know how the controls are. And we're all figuring this out collectively. So feel free to ask questions. This is a giant co-op game. It's never been player versus player, because you'd feel that. So yeah, feel free to ask questions, pass this along, and have fun. And hey, if you didn't necessarily fully understand this from this lens and perspective, look at various other ones. Anything kind of gets you to this connection. There's various lenses of perspective. This device gives you more understanding available at your fingertips than the Pharaoh and the kings of old. So go wild, but don't let yourself consumed by it. I'm out of here. Have a good one, guys.